This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Hey, good morning, everyone. What could be a better time to speak about Hanukkah? Erev Chanukah, Chav Daled Kislev. Hanukkah is given a very interesting name. Actually, Chazal describe a relationship that Hanukkah has with Purim. The Shlach Hadesh says Hanukkah and Purim are Shnei Chaverim, Shnei Reim. They're two friends. Hanukkah and Purim are two friends. You know, you don't typically think of a Yom Tif as a personality, as being a living entity. But Hanukkah has a personality. It has friends. Everybody needs friends. Even Hanukkah needs friends. And Hanukkah's friend is Purim. In fact, the Shlach Hadesh says that the days in between Hanukkah and Purim are like Chol HaMoed. You know, that's usually an expression you hear about when it comes to Pesach and Shavuos. But Hanukkah and Purim, they have this relationship and they create a period of time between the two of them as Chol HaMoed. What exactly is this relationship between Hanukkah and Purim? Moreover, the Zohar HaKadosh says that Hanukkah and Purim are called Trei Tamchin Da'iraisa, the two pillars of the entire Torah. The two pillars of the Torah. Ad Kedei Kach, says the Zohar, that when Esav came, when the Sarai Shal Esav came to wrestle with Yaakov, Vayiga b'chaf Yerechai, that the angel of Esav tried to uproot the hips of Yaakov Avinu, the Zohar says he tried to uproot the support of Torah. And he explains as follows. He says, you know, there are two opposing forces in this world. You have the force of Yaakov Avinu, Torah, and the force of Esav. The thing is, Yaakov Avinu has a coil. Esav has yadayim. But Esav has no raglayim. Esav has no feet. He's incapacitated. How is Esav going to get feet? Says the Zohar HaKadosh, if Esav could take away the feet of Yaakov Avinu, if Esav could dislocate the hip socket of Yaakov Avinu and take away his feet, says the Zohar, what are the feet of Yaakov Avinu? Tamchin Da'iraisa, the support of Torah. Those who support Torah. If Esav could somehow convince Klal Yisrael not to support Torah, then he takes away the legs of Yaakov Avinu, and then the Nachash doesn't have to slither around anymore. The Nachash could walk around on feet. And when Yaakov Avinu was attacked by the hip socket, the Nachash co-opted the Tamchin Da'iraisa. He co-opted the legs of Yaakov, and now the Nachash, so to speak, is much more mobile than he ever was. That's the Zohar's description of the encounter of Yaakov Avinu and Esav. So the Bnei Yissaschar says, therefore, on Chanukah, which Chanukah are one of the Tamchin Da'iraisa, that the minhag is on Chanukah and Purim to support Torah, because since these days uphold the Torah, these days are called Tamchin Da'iraisa. Therefore, the minhag in Klal Yisrael is to be mefarnes Talmidei Chachamim Dafka Chanukah and Purim. That's the Bnei Yissaschar, and based on the Zohar's understanding of Chanukah and Purim. Chanukah and Purim are called Tamchin Da'iraisa, and therefore we support Torah Dafka on Chanukah and Purim. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld has a different take on this. First, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld says, actually, if Esav was trying to dislocate the hip sockets of Yaakov Avinu, he's trying to remove the support of Torah, and the support of Torah are Chanukah and Purim, then there needs to be some kind of remez to this in the pasuk. Says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, a brilliant remez, the word Vayiga b'kaf Yerechai, Vayiga is 89, Gematria Chanukah. Kaf Yerechai, Gematria Purim. That's the remez of Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. So here it is, that Yaakov Avinu is headed back to get Pachim Ketanim, which we have many sources. Those Pachim Ketanim was Yaakov Avinu was looking to secure Chanukah, and who comes against him? The Sarai Shal Esav, and he's coming. Vayiga is Gematria Chanukah. The battle of Yaakov and Esav is the battle of Chanukah. And this year, we have another battle because Chanukah and Chagam, their holiday, also coincide at the same time. So I want to share with you Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld's understanding of this epic battle between Yaakov Avinu and Esav. There's an ancient custom, and you'll be hard-pressed to find it in practice, that there were communities that would read on Chanukah, something called Megillas Antiochus. The Tosfos Rid brings down, Masechta Sukkah and Daf Mem Daled, that in a community that the minhag is to read Megillas Antiochus, don't make a bracha on it, because there's no shoyresh in halacha that you have to read Megillas Antiochus. The Shibaili Haleket also brings down, there was a custom to read Megillas Antiochus. If you look in Siddur Oitzar Tfilos, he brings down in the community of Kappa, in the community of Kara, they would read Megillas Antiochus. Some would even read it after the Haftorah of Rani V'Simchi. It was an ancient custom. But in Flatbush today, in Rabbi Reisen's 36 years, they have never, and they have the klaf for all the Haftorahs, right? Yes. They don't have Megillas Antiochus. Nor in any shul in Flatbush. Do they read Megillas Antiochus? It's considered, right? It's interesting, I'm going to talk about that. The grandson of the Rabbi Yehuda and the Yad HaMelech on the Rambam wonders, why don't we have a biblical obligation to read Megillas Antiochus? He says, what's Midaraisa? Because what's the makar that we read Megillas Esther? The Gemara in Masechta Megillah says it's a kal v'chomer. Uma me'avdus l'cheiros amrinon shira mimisa l'chayim lo'kol shekain. The Gemara makes a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer, the Chassam Sofer says, is Daraisa. Chassam Sofer learns me'ikr, meaning fundamentally Megillah is Daraisa. Megillah on Purim, the Chassam Sofer learns, fundamentally is Daraisa. Why? Because it's learned out from a kal v'chomer. So Yad HaMelech on the Rambam asks, so why wouldn't the same kal v'chomer apply to Megillas Antiochus? Why wouldn't we say, yes, the Levush says there was just religious persecution, so you don't necessarily have a kal v'chomer. You don't necessarily have a kal v'chomer because it wasn't mimisa l'chayim, but it's at least a mamotzinu. It's at least a mamotzinu. And by the way, even though, we take for granted, we think there's only one way to look at Hanukkah. Hanukkah is not like Purim. Purim, they try to kill us. Hanukkah was only religious persecution, so therefore we celebrate spiritually. Yes, the Levush says that, and that's the more commonly understood view of Hanukkah, but the Rambam clearly disagrees with the Levush. How do we know? By the way, the Rambam starts off by saying, the Rambam in Halacha Aleph of Hilchos Chanukah says, what's Hanukkah? The Rambam says, Pashtu yadam b'mamoinam, uvivnoisehem. So the Rambam learns it wasn't just religious persecution. There was definitely financial persecution. There was definitely persecution of the gufim of Klal Yisrael. And that's why the Rambam L'Shitase learns Chanukah. The Rambam says Yimei Simcha. When the Rambam codifies what's Chanukah, it's Yimei Simcha, not like the Levush. Because Chanukah was not only religious persecution. Chanukah was physical persecution. The Imkain, the kal v'chomer that the Gemara has for Megillas Esther should apply equally for Chanukah. I don't know his name. I can't tell you. Who wrote Megillas Esther? That's also a question. Did Mordechai write it? Did Esther write it? That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says Ezra wrote it. So who wrote it? We don't know exactly who wrote it. But shouldn't you have to read some kind of account? To make the question even stronger, if you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Purim, does the Rambam tell you the story of Purim? No. And yet, the opening halacha of the Rambam Hilchos Chanukah, the Rambam gives you the whole story of Chanukah. The Rambam's not a storyteller, and he doesn't write Divrei Agada. The Rambam only writes halacha, mutter, asur. Why does the Rambam tell you the story of Chanukah? It's for a halachic reason. Because if a guy goes tonight and he lights the menorah, and he says, by the way, why am I lighting the menorah? And you tell him, why are you lighting the menorah? Because 2024 is about to end. It's almost a new calendar year. He said, really, that's such a nice Yom Tif. And he lights the menorah. Yatsa or lo yatsa? Lo yatsa. The mitzvah is parsume nisa. If he doesn't know what the nes is, he's not yotze the mitzvah. So the Rambam's telling you the story, la halacha, not for historical background, la halacha, so you know what happened. So if the story is halachically necessary to fulfill the mitzvah, then why wouldn't we read the story like we read every other miracle that occurred? We say the Haggadah, we read the Megillas Esther. What about Megillas Antiochus? That's the kash of the Yad HaMelech and others. So I want to share with you a very interesting answer to this. I think Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld is almost saying this, but once he says what he says, I think we could just extend it. It's simple to extend his idea. The Gemara in Masechta Yuma Daf Chaf Beis asks, the pasuk says in Tehillim, Lam natseach al ayeles hashachar mizmor leDavid, Lam natseach al ayeles hashachar. Who is that referring to? Who's the ayeles hashachar? Esther. Says the Gemara, Lama nimshal Esther l'shachar, Ma shachar soif halayla, af Esther soif hanisim. Just like the morning star is the end of the night, Esther is the last miracle. In fact, the Gemara, v'ho'ika Chanukah. Chanukah came after Purim. Purim happened in the 70 years between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. Chanukah was 200 years, about 200 years later, 200 years into the Bayis Sheni. Says the Gemara, Nitein li kasev ka'amrinan. Yes, Chanukah came after Purim. Purim, though, was allowed to be written. Chanukah was not allowed to be written. Okay? So the last miracle that ever happened was Chanukah. Purim, but Chanukah was not allowed to be written. So Purim was the last miracle that you're allowed to record. Chanukah was a miracle, but you can't record it. So Chida asks, why can't you record it? Why are we not allowed to record the miracle of Chanukah? So the Ben Yoyada says, he quotes the Chida, and the Ben Yoyada says, there's a simple reason why Chanukah is recorded, that Purim is recorded, and Chanukah is not recorded. Says the Ben Yoyada, could you just write down any story that happens to Jewish people, any story of salvation, and say, okay, here it is, it's part of the Torah? Could you just canonize any story? You can't just canonize a story. The first thing you need to know is you have to have Ruach HaKodesh. It has to be divinely inspired. So in the times of Purim, you had Mordechai, you had Esther. When the miracle happened, the Ribono Shel Olam guided them to write down very specific words, how to record the story, and therefore the story became part of Tanakh because you had Nevi'im. But Chanukah happened 200 years later. It was after the cessation of prophecy. It was after Nevuah, so you had great people, you had Chashmonaim, you had Talmidei Chachamim, but they couldn't write a story divinely inspired. That's the reason why it's not Nitein li kasev. Says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, now we understand the deeper meaning of the Zayar, that Chanukah and Purim are the two pillars of the Torah. Say, what? How are Chanukah and Purim the two pillars of the Torah? Says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, Chanukah and Purim are a stira minei ubei. What's a stira? Purim has a Megillah. Chanukah has no Megillah. How do you answer that? How do you answer why Purim has a Megillah and Chanukah has no Megillah? There's one answer to that. Because the day came where the Ribono Shel Olam stopped speaking to man. That principle that we derive from Chanukah and Purim is the pillar of the whole Torah. Why? Because ba oisai ha'esh, that person came along and founded a religion, and the Noitzrim say that, look, God spoke to our guy, and he told our guy to abrogate the law. You don't have to keep the law anymore. Comes the Shlach Kadosh. The Shlach Kadosh says, do you know what were the last two prophecies in the Chumash? Who was the last Navi? The last Navi was Malachi. And the Ribono Shel Olam tells Malachi two things. Number one, Zichru Teiras Moshe Avdi. Number one is, you got to keep the law. I'm not going to be speaking to you for a while now. You got to keep the law. And number two, it's been nice speaking to you. I'll see you again. So two things. Number one, I'm not talking to you again. And number two, until then, you have to keep the law. So we tell them, look, God spoke to your guy. He told us a few hundred years ago, he's not talking to us again. And in the meantime, we have to keep the law. And anyway, the big kasha, she'ein olav tshuva, and I remember I heard this personally from our Rabbi Victor Miller many years ago. The big kasha on them is, if God spoke to him, how did he not speak to man for 500 years? What happened in 500 years? He spoke to Malachi, and he didn't speak to anybody until your guy? For 500 years, he took a hiatus. So what do? They take the book of the Maccabees, and they took as many interim books as they can, and they stuff it in between the Ksuvim and their testament. For them, it's considered fundamental that the book of the Maccabees and the story of Chanukah is part of their document. But the main foundation of the whole Torah is the fact that the story of Chanukah is not nitin likasev. Once it's not nitin likasev, nobody could claim later that God communicated with man. Says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, this is what the Zohar means. The two pillars of the Torah are Chanukah and Purim. Purim shows there's a Megillah. Chanukah has no Megillah. What's the answer to that question? Nevuah stopped. Nevuah stopped. That is the central principle that upholds the Torah until Mashiach comes. So, says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, let me tell you the true meaning of the word Chanukah. You ready for this? Ches Neviim, there are 8 books of the Neviim. Vav Ksuvim, there are 6 books of the scriptures. Hey Megillos, and not Megillas Antiochus. The word Chanukah means the book is closed. It's chasum v'sasum. You can't add to it. That's the meaning of the word. The meaning of Chanukah is preservation of the Torah. Nothing can be added. Ches Neviim, Vav Ksuvim, Hey Megillos. Or, says Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, Chanukah, Chanu, Chafei. They stopped when they got to the 25th book. The word means, do not put Megillas Antiochus into Tanakh. That's the meaning of the word.
Rabbi, is that a kasha on the Rambam?
It's not a kasha on the Rambam because you need to know the story.
But it's written.
You're allowed to write the story. You can't canonize the story. It can't be incorporated into Tanakh. But that means, according to Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, the definition of Chanukah is what's Chanukah? Celebrating the authenticity of the Torah. And that nothing can be added to it. I think it's not a stretch that, according to Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, there's a very simple reason why Minhag Yisrael is not to read Megillas Antiochus. Reading Megillas Antiochus would be antithetical to the entire essence of Chanukah. The purpose, the name of Chanukah is they stopped when they got to the 25th book. There are 8 books of the Nevi'im, there are 6 books of Ksuvim, there are 5 Megillas, and not Megillas Antiochus. So the Rambam is forced, so that we're Yotzei, the mitzvah, the menorah, we got to know the story. No, I thought of a new answer to the Beis Yosef's kasha. Why are there 8 days of Chanukah? I never realized this. And I have a sefer at home, 100 answers to Beis Yosef's kasha. And then I got a sefer, 500 answers to the Beis Yosef's kasha. I have answer number 501. There are 8 lines in the Gemara of my Chanukah, right? What could be a greater Yom Tif, right? 8 lines in the Gemara of my Chanukah, the Tana Rabbanan.
Wouldn't the nace of the Nerot be considered like God was talking to man?
It's a message. We always have messages, but in terms of communication of words, that stopped. That stopped. We don't have Nevo anymore. And that's why, according to Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonfeld, there are 2 tamchin d'oraisa. So to speak, the internal conflict between Chanukah and Purim upholds the authenticity of the Torah. Okay, let's move on to another interesting aspect. The Gemara says a very interesting terminology when it comes to the legislation of Chanukah. The Gemara says they came into the Heichal and they found oil to last for 1 night. It lasted for 8 nights. L'shana acheres. The next year, kavum va'asam yamim tovim b'halal v'hodah. They established yamim tovim for halal and hodah. Now, here's a halachic ha'ara. They made Chanukah for halal, to say halal, u'v'hodah, and to say al hanisim. By the way, the word Haidah is a machlokes rishonim, what Haidah is referring to. Rashi says it's referring to Al Hanisim, which comes out that even though if you forget Al Hanisim, you do not repeat Shemana Esrei, nevertheless, if you forget Al Hanisim, you didn't have Chanukah. What is Chanukah? They were koiveya Chanukah to say Al Hanisim, which means you could have 2 guys. One guy ate a donut, and he didn't say Al Hanisim. The other guy said Al Hanisim, and he didn't eat a donut. One of them had Chanukah, the other one did not have Chanukah. The definition of Chanukah is Amiras Al Hanisim. That's the fulfillment of Chanukah. So you don't have to go back. I think Rav Miller would put keys in his siddur by the appropriate place so he doesn't forget. It's very hard. I have some siddurim, they give you it's gray, it's bold. My siddur, it has a lot of features, but The outstanding feature is not the hazkara me'ein ha'ma'ira. So you need to, I don't know what, hold something, do what you got to do. Do what you got to do to remember to say Al Hanisim. But the question is, why Lashana Acheras? Why in year 2? Why did they enact Hanukkah in year 2? Why didn't they do it in year 1? They didn't do it right away. Do we ever find such a thing that they waited until the next year to legislate Hanukkah? Why the next year?
Also, the next year. That's how he sent out.
The Ramban in Masechta Megillah says actually that in year 1, in year 2, they may only have enacted for the open cities and not even for the krachim. Okay, that might be for a different reason, because they thought maybe the walled cities were not in danger. But what is it about Chanukah that they didn't legislate right away? You know, if somebody forgets Al Hanisim in Berachas Hamazon, the Ramah has an interesting chiddush. You would think if you forget Al Hanisim, you're finished, you're done. If you forget Al Hanisim, there's nothing you could do. The Ramah has a chiddush that you could inject it at the end of the Berachas Hamazon. You could say a harachaman. You could say harachaman hu yasa lanu nisim and Niflaos k'moshe asisa avosenu b'yomim heim bazman hazeh. So the Kadmonim ask on the Ramah. The Kadmonim ask a very interesting question on the Ramah. The terminology of this harachaman is you're asking the Rebbeinu Shem to perform a miracle for you. You're not to ask for a miracle. You're not to ask for an ace. The Gemara says you're not to be mispalo for an ace, and if you're mispalo for an ace, then it's menaken loy b'zechu yosav. You'll never find in the davening a tefillah for a miracle. Yet on Chanukah, if you forget Al Hanisim, you're allowed to say, Rebbeinu Shem, please make miracles for us. How are you allowed to do that? That's the kasha of the Bechar Shar.
Because it's an ace rot, and the Bnei Yisachar says Chanukah is an ace rot.
Same thing with Torah, by the way.
Bnei Yisachar is a great sefer, but hear me out. Bichlal, there are many miracles that happened in Tanakh. When Yeshua went to the Shemesh Begivoin and he said, stop, the sun stopped. It was a miracle. Shemesh Begivoin doim v'yarech ba'al yaloin. He said, stop. Do we have a calendar date to commemorate that miracle? No. When we defeated Sancherev, when Chizkiyahu defeated Sancherev, do we celebrate that? We don't even know what day it happened. So why is it that there's certain calendar dates, certain miraculous occasions we commemorate, and certain miraculous occasions we do not commemorate?
More so was the last case, right?
What?
Sancheirev's troops dying, that really was the last nation.
There are dozens, there are countless miracles that occurred in Tanakh, and only some are commemorated and others are not commemorated. So what's the threshold? What's the barometer to determine when we celebrate a Nes? And now I'm going to get very controversial. I'm going to tell you a great revelation of the Chida in at least 6 svarim. The Chida says, and he's bothered by this question, that contrary to public opinion, that all Jews were endangered in the times of Purim. It's not true. Lo haya v'lo nivra. Achashverosh did not rule over the entire world. He was only ruled over the known world. He did not rule over Europe. And therefore the decree of Haman was only against Ashkenazim and not against Sfardim. The Sfardim were never in danger by Haman. Similar to Hitler's decree primarily, don't say I know, but primarily against Ashkenazic Jewry. The same thing with Haman. The Chida writes in 6 different Svarim, including Leiv David Perek Chav Tes. It was only against, so he wants to know, why do Sfardim have to keep Purim? These are all rhetoric questions, which means this is not interactive. Okay? So, the Chida offers the following principle.
It's Parsha Madai, isn't that in the slide?
The Chida offers the following principle. The Ramchal writes it in the Darach Hashem. The Kedushas Levi writes it in Kedusha Rishona, and it's found in the Bnei Yisachar and Mamar Daled. The Yesod of all Yom Tov. If tonight, when you light the Ner Chanukah, you think that I'm commemorating a miracle that happened 2,000 years ago, no, that's not the point. If you think when you're sitting around the Seder, you're commemorating a miracle that happened 3,300 years ago, Why would you think your children would be interested in remembering something that happened 3,300 years ago? They can't even remember where they put their knapsack last night. They're going to remember what happened 3,300 years ago? The yesod of a Yom Tif is not history. When certain miracles happen, they're one and done. They're one and done. Hashem brings down miraculous energy, divine energy. The miracle happens, and then it dissipates. But there are certain momentous occasions where the Rebbeinu Shalom not only brings a surge of spiritual divine energy and miracle, but Hashem sears that divine light into the day. Hashem sends down and sears into the Jewish calendar date a living divine energy of salvation that becomes the identity of that day. Chaf Hey Kislev, we're not commemorating what happened 2,000 years ago. Tonight, when you light the menorah, you are accessing, you are experiencing a living, divine surge of energy and Yeshua and Nisim. Not that happened only Bayamim Oheim, but that's happening Bazman Hazeh, currently, right now. It's not about the past, it's about right now. What's happening right now? You tell your children, you tell your descendants that the Rebbeinu Shalom, the miracles He wrought, He didn't wrought, it is currently occurring. It is recurring. The words Bazman Hazeh means currently, right now. It says in Minchas Yitzchak, we're allowed to daven for a miracle on Chanukah because we're not asking Hashem to perform a new miracle. You can't daven for a new miracle. That takes out of your account. But miracles are happening. There is a surge of spiritual, miraculous energy that comes down for 8 days on the 25th day of Kislev. And you're saying, once it's here already, once it's here and you're bringing it, we want to see it, we want to experience it, we want to access it, we want to be able to perceive it. You're not asking for something new. It's happening. We just want to see it a little bit more. Says Bnei Yissaschar, that is the barometer to determine whether a miracle we commemorate or we don't commemorate. He says something amazing. If in Tanakh it says the calendar date of a miracle that happens, then you know it's a recurring light, and we make a Yom Tov to celebrate it. The pasuk doesn't say what date Yeshua stopped the sun. It doesn't say what date we beat Sancherev's army. So that miracle was one and done. One and done. Says the Bnei Yissaschar, we have a tradition, me Rabbi Seinu noichei nefesh. The Kedushas Levi says the exact same thing. We have a tradition. When the Mishnah says, Hakoire Megillah lemafreya lo yatsa. If you read the Megillah retroactively, think about the meaning of the word. What do you mean retroactively? You're not reading the Megillah you can't read something retroactively. Retroactively means you make something happen now and chal earlier. If it wanted to say you're reading the Megillah out of order, it should say Hakoire Megillah shaloi kisei there. What do you mean Hakoire Megillah lemafreya? Says Bnei Yissaschar, Hakar Megillah Mafreya means if you think when a miracle happens, it happened then, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and its relevance was for then and back in time, but it's not occurring annually, la yatsa. You didn't understand the meaning of the message of the Nes. The Nes is not a one-time occurrence, it's a living occurrence. It's not Kar Megillah Mafreya, it's Hakare HaMegillah Bazman Hazeh. It's Sha'asa Nisim La'avaisenu Bazman Hazeh. So I saw one of the 100 answers to answer the Kasha of the Beis Yosef of why they had to wait until the next year to establish Purim. So first of all, why they have to wait till year 2? Because this happened after Nevuah. So they didn't know. They didn't know whether that light of Hanukkah is that a one and done miracle or will it repeat annually? So the miracles that took place in Tanakh, they had Nevi'im. They knew the miracle was for all time. That's when we say Ki li'olam chastai. So the Chachamim had to wait until year 2, light the menorah, and see, will the light come back? And it did. And therefore, L'shana ha'acheres, kavam v'asam, yom tovim b'halav ha'ida. They couldn't do it in year 1. They Pasha didn't know. They didn't know. They knew there were miracles in Tanakh in the times of Yehoshua. It didn't happen in year 2. Sancheriv's defeat didn't repeat in year 2. They didn't know if Chanukah would repeat. When they realized it did, they were koivea b'shana ha'acheres. And some suggest, to answer the Beis Yosef, why they made 8 days of Chanukah, is they realized, they saw it came for 8 days. They saw that energy, that divine light of salvation came down to the world for 8 days, and therefore they were koivea 8 days of Chanukah. Let's move on to another interesting topic. In the last couple of weeks, we saw with our own eyes the fall of a very powerful regime in the world, the fall of Syria. And Dvarim Gedolim Einim B'Mikra, great things are never coincidental. Somehow, is this a preparation for Hanukkah? So I want to share with you the kasha of Rabbi Chanan. But maybe we'll highlight it a little bit. There have been 4 ummahs who have had power over Klal Yisrael throughout history: Bavel, Paras, Yavan, Edom. Never have Chazal told us we should fight against the prevailing power. Not in the times of the Babylonians, not in the times of the Persians, not in the times of the Romans, only against Yavan. I've seen many kol koreis of the Mayetzes Gedolei HaTorah. Never have they said we should arm. That's not what we do. We haven't done that throughout history. Except for in the times of Yavan, Greece. Somehow, when it comes to Yavan, the proper response is milchama. Now we know, whenever we don't know what to do, Im lo yisei dilach hayafeh b'anashim, tzi'ilach be'ikvei hatzayin, Rabbi Chanan says. If you don't know what to do, you have to follow your ancestors. Everything that happens in the world, we say, Masei Avos Siman Labanim. Where in the Chumash would the root of Chanukah be? You ever think about that? Where in the Chamishei Chumshei Torah would you say, that's the makar of the story of Chanukah? Well, if Chanukah is a Melchama, you would have to go to the first war in history. What's the first war in history?
4 kings against the 5.
4 kings against the 5 kings. So the 4 kings defeat the 5 kings. Amraphel, Aryoch, Kedar La'omer, Sidal. The 4 kings beat the 5 kings, and Avram Avinu goes out to fight the 4 kings. Comes the Medrash, who are the 4 kings? And the derech of the Medrash in Bereshis is, whenever you have the number 4, it always stands for the 4 Malchios. And they'll always say, Bavel, Madai, Yavan, Edom. And sure enough, says the Medrash, Amraphel, Nimrod, Bavel, Aryoch, Antiochus, Kedar La'omer, Madai, Sidal, Edom. It's interesting, the Medrash puts it out of order. It was bothering me. Bavel, Yavan, Madai, Edom. This Medrash didn't sit well with me. Sure enough, if you look in the Ramban, Mamish Mesiach Lefi Tumai. Vayihi Bimei Amraphel Melech Shinar. Says the Ramban, Amraphel is Bavel. Aryoch is Paras. Kedar La'omer is Yavan. The Ramban just switches it. You know that changes the whole world? Because of these 4 kings, Amraphel, Aryoch, Kedar La'omer, and Sidal, which one is Avram Avinu attacking Be'ikr? Eis Kedar La'omer. By the way, I just spoke before this for Sfardim, and I did that. And they didn't know what I was talking about. They don't know. Eis Kedar La'omer. Eis Kedar La'omer. So that means Avram Avinu, of all the 4 kings, he's attacking Kedar La'omer. And from here on, all you hear about is Kedar La'omer. Which means, according to Ramban, who's Kedar La'omer? Antiochus. That means the first war in history is against Yavan. So I don't know if this fully answers Rabbi Chanan's question of why we went to war against Yavan, but there is a strong Masei Avos Siman Labanim. Now when you fight a war, it's specifically against Yavan. The first recorded war in history is against Yavan. Fine. And who does Avram Avinu take to battle? It's definitely Rabin Biyad Ma'atim, because it's against the four kings. How many people does Avram Avinu take? 318. And Rashi says it's not 318, it's really just him and Eliezer. Interesting. Just him and Eliezer. And who does Avram Avinu take? Vayorek. What does Targum say? Vizores, Zrizim. Who are called Zrizim in the Gemara? Kaihanim Zrizim. Kaihanim. Who does he take? Vayorek es Chanichav. Could you imagine? He takes his trained soldiers. Rashi is very troubled. We don't have the word Chanichav in the whole Tanakh. What does Chanichav mean? Says Rashi, K'may Chanukah. Shenemar, Mizmor Shechanukas Habayis, Chanukas Mizbeach, Rashi says. So who is Avram Avinu taking against in this war? His Chanukah people. You think that's a coincidence? Says Reb Lev Haiman in the Sefer Chikrei Lev, the source of the Melchama of Chanukah in the Torah is the war of Avram Avinu against the four kings. Who does he take? Ma'atim. Who's he fighting? Nimrod, Rishaim. Zaydim biyadois keisor rasech. Avram Avinu was zakein v'yoshev b'yeshiva. When does he fight the war? Vayechalek aleihem Laila, the only war fought at night. Why Laila? Because Chanukah is the war against the Yevanim. Shehechshichu einayim shel Yisrael b'zeh. They darkened our eyes. It's the war against the night. So then, what is Avram Avinu? He must be the light. Yeah, the Medrash says, "Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or Zeh Avraham." Now, Avram Avinu meets somebody at the end of the war. Umalki Tzedek Melech Sholem Hoitzi Lechem Vayoyin V'hu Kohen Lekel Elyon. When's the first time the word Kohen is mentioned in the Torah? You know, Reb Tzadok HaKohen says, he says, I think I have a tradition. That's his lashon. He says, I think I have a tradition that the source of everything in the Torah is the first time it appears. Maybe the makar of this, I'm going to ask you a personal question now, okay? Who has dreams? You have dreams? You ever dream of the letter Tes? You ever go to sleep at night? Just it's a recommendation. If you want to know what to dream about a Tes. It's a good sign if you dream about a Tes. Because the first Tes in the Torah is Vayar Elokim es ha'ar kitayv. So try to dream about Tesses. Or let's say right now, if you're dreaming currently, right now, Bazman hazeh, not 2,000 years ago. Tes would be a good thing to... So that shows us the first time something's in the Torah, it's significant. The first time Kohen appears in the Torah is in the war of Avram Avinu. So you say, but the wrong guy is a Kohen, because Shem was a Kohen, no? V'hu Kohen lekel elyon. Not so fast. Chazal say, because Shem didn't mention and praise Hashem's name. First he praised Abraham, and then he praised Hashem. He lost the kahuna to Abraham. So Abraham's the Kohen. The one who waged the war is the Kohen. Why is he mentioning Hashem's name so much? You know? Umalki Tzedek Melech Sholem, Hoitzi Lechem Vayoyin, V'hu Kohen Lekel Elyon. Vayivarchei Vayoymar, Baruch Avram Lekel Elyon, Ubaruch Kel Elyon. So much Kel Elyon over here. Did you ever see Hashem's name mentioned so many times in consecutive psukim? You know what the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says? One of the gezeros of the Yevanim is Gazra Gezerah, Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Ches, Shaloi lahazker shem shamayim al pihem, ukshe gavra malchus chashmonoi, hiskinu sheyu mazkirim shem shamayim b'shtarois. You would write kach v'kach leYochanan kohen gadol lekel elyon. Oyoy menorah, the takana of the Chashmonaim was dafka to mention the Shem Hashem. Which Shem Hashem? Kel elyon. Do you have any bigger concentration of mentions of Kel Elyon in the Torah than those three psukim? So you'll say, but wait a second. This wasn't a war just against the Greeks, because Alexander the Great fell and his Malchus broke into 4 parts, and these were specifically Syrian Greeks. Yeah? So if you really want to have a remez to Chanukah, Avram Avinu is going to have to defeat Syria, right? So what does the pasuk say? Vayecholek aleihem laila hu va'avadav vayakem vayirdefeim ad choiva asher misamoel ledamasek. Avram Avinu is oiker them in their shoyresh. He destroys them until Damascus. And that's the remez to Chanukah. Could you have anything more compelling? Says this is from Rav Lev Haiman in the Sefer Chikrei Lev. The remez to Chanukah is the war of the 4 kings, Avram's defeat of the 4 kings, all the way ad Damasek. By the way, the Ben Ish Chai writes that just agavorcha, the word Elyon is al Yavan. Al Yavan. So Kael al Yavan. But there's another important halacha. And that is, what is the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah? The mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is mitzvah lahadlik ad shechashecha until ad shetichla regel min hashuk. V'yad kama, for how long? Says the Gemara in Shabbos, ad shetichla ragla de tarmudai, until the tarmudaim vanish from the marketplace. Who are the tarmudaim? Who are these guys? Who are tarmudaim? Do you look out the window and say, Tati, could we still light? Check if there's a tarmudai outside. If he's still walking outside, you could still light. Who are tarmudaim? I'll ask you another question. Is there a mitzvah of parsume nisa to goyim? Or is it only to yidden? It's interesting, the Sharat Tzion writes, the mitzvah is only to Jews. The mitzvah parsume nisa is only to Jews. He says, just because the mitzvah is to Jews. The Sharat Tzion writes, if you come home very late at night and everyone's sleeping, he says you should try to wake up 2 or 3 people. Because since you have the capacity to be mefarsim the nes, you need to. But if you live in a Gentile neighborhood, you don't have to do anything. Then it's just for yourself. Reb Chaim Kanievsky at least writes differently than that. Reb Chaim Kanievsky says the mitzvah parsume nisa to goyim is a machlokes rishonim. Rashi says tarmudaim are a name of a nationality. They're tarmudaim, they're people. And what do? They sold firewood. So people would go home, they would get cold, they would have to buy wood, they would go out to the market. If tarmudaim were still in the market, they were the last ones in the market, and you could still light the Ner Chanukah. According to Rashi, Reb Chaim says, we see that parsume nisa is even to goyim. But the Rif says no, tarmudaim is not a name of a nation, it's a name of an occupation, it's a job. Says Reb Chaim, the machlokes Rashi and the Rif is on this nekuda, is there parsume nisa to goyim? But according to Rashi, tarmudaim were a shem umah. Which umah is this? The Gemara Nivama says the tarmudaim were descendants of the Avdei Shloimei. The Avdei Shloimei married Jewish women. And according to the opinion, Eved or Akum Shabbat Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer, they're all Mamzerim. It's an area of the most impure lineage. And where is this area? Do you know it's in Syria? It's the Palmyra region of Syria, which was considered the most tainted of all lineages. They descended from the Avdei Shloimei. And you light the menorah ad shetichla ragla de tarmudai, until tarmudai is still relevant. And in the last 20 years, this region, the Palmyra region, has been basically destroyed. When Bashar came into power, he was supported by Russia. It's a historic region in Syria. And the Russians made army bases in all the historic sites. And when ISIS came in, they destroyed all the historic sites. And in the end of November, the Israelis bombed this region. And my understanding is even as late as 10 days ago, it was destroyed even further. And the Gemara says, we're going to light that menorah. Aditichla ragla de tarmudai. So these are all events that should give us increased hope and aspiration that Rabbeinu Bechaya tells us that Chanukah is a lashon of inauguration of the coming of the Geula. And all the events we see, Be'ezus Hashem, we hope that we'll see with our own eyes how they will usher in very special times for Klal Yisrael. And it's said on the sheet that I have to speak about what to think at a Chanukah party, so let me just stick that in, right? That was one of the bullet points. So what to think at a Chanukah party? Rav Miller would say that Chanukah is a time of Haidah, it's a time of gratitude. We know there's a gratitude that we have as Yichidim, as individuals, we say Moedim. There's a Haidah that we express as a Tzibor, we say Moedim D'Rabbanan. But there is another category of Haidah, not as an individual and not as a tzibor, but this category of Haidah is Havu Lashem Mishpachais Amim Havu Lashem Kavod Va'oz. There is a bechina of Haidah, the Haidah of a mishpacha. It's not a yachid, and it's not a tzibor. You rarely have such an idea of a mitzvah that devolves on a mishpacha. You have on individuals, and you have on a tzibor. But when it comes to gratitude, there is a category of gratitude, Havu Lashem Mishpachais Amim, Havu Lashem Kavod Va'oz. So since Chanukah is a time of Haidah, and minhag is many families get together, it's an opportunity to fulfill this aspect of Haidah. We should all be zoicha to see, Be'ezus Hashem, continued Yeshuas v'nachames for Klal Yisrael, ad de tichla ragla de tormadoi, ad biaskal tzedek afreilchen Chanukah, everyone. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.